Patricia, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
It is my pleasure to be here, and thank you for making time for me.
Yes. Well, I am so excited about our conversation. And the way I like to start every interview is by asking guests, as a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
All I knew was that I wanted to be a businesswoman.
Ah,
No idea what kind, but I always aspired to that. I think it's because I saw a glimmer of it in my mother. She was very entrepreneurial. She always was selling something, whether it was home goods, vitamins, beauty products, you name it. She always was trying to sell something to somebody. And I ended up as just because of the way she managed her schedule and all the children she had, I ended up going with her to many of her appointments and to her sales calls with ladies in the neighborhoods. And so
mm,
got a sense for what that looked like, the kind of conversations you would have, conversation starters. And
mm,
to me, it just seemed like a natural evolution is that
mm.
you should be a businesswoman.
I love that. Well, for viewers who don't know you and don't know what you do, can you tell us a little bit about how that businesswoman dream connects to what you do today?
Well, how does it connect? It's really kind of a complicated question. I'll try to answer it in the simplest way. The way it connects with me is that all throughout my career, I've always worked. I've never really taken a whole lot of time out except for one small period, time when I had a health issue. And so for me, to be a businesswoman is about integrating all of my life into everything that I do. In other words, I never kept my work separate from my personal life. Everything was integrated. And I think that that is now it's considered a more holistic way of looking at your life. But I never knew any different. As a young woman, I put myself through school. I always worked. I went to school at nighttime. And I managed to figure out a way to work both things and to integrate them. And as a result, I have tried all three sectors. I have tried the public sector. I have worked in the private sector for a large Fortune 500 and the entrepreneurial track. So I can say that as a business person, I know what each one of those tracks looks like, what it feels like. And what feels most natural to me is the entrepreneurial route. It allows me to integrate everything in my life with what I do in my businesses. And
Mm.
as you may know, I've also been with my various companies in multitude of sectors as well. So that's how it works in my life.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because you say integrate the work and the personal life. And that's what your mom did.
Exactly. Now we can call it more sophisticated titles, but when I was 10 years old, we didn't know any different. It's just what you did because it's what was necessary. And that in the pandemic, the last 2 years have brought a lot of that to the surface. Their families, mothers, dad,
Yeah.
students are having to integrate their personal life with their work life, their school life. And it is, which I think is why there is such a large pushback to go back to the office because it's easier to manage our lives when we're able to integrate and try to achieve more balance between home and work and school,
Mm.
the demands of every aspect of our lives.
Yeah. Well, tell us, so you wanted to be a businesswoman. You mentioned working your way through school. How did you end up as an entrepreneur? How did you decide to do it? It takes a lot of courage to launch your own thing. And you mentioned working Fortune 500 company. What was the
Mhm.
path to get to where you are today?
Well, let me start at the beginning.
Yeah.
We grew up in El Paso. My parents still live there, in El Paso, Texas, as far west Texas as you can go before you New Mexico. And obviously the Mexican border is right there. My parents were immigrants and there were six of us. I have
Mm,
siblings. And so it was a very tight budget that my parents were able to provide for us. And so I went to school on Pell Grants and I worked part time. And then eventually I figured out I needed to work full time. And so I worked full time during the day. I was an executive assistant and went to school at night because that was the only option at the time. There was no such thing as online school. There was no such thing as online college courses. You had to go either during the day and or in the evening. Well, because I had to support myself, I had to pay for my tuition, my car, my insurance, all of those things, I ended up having to work. And so I've never known any different, but it's like not to have a job, right? And not to earn a living. So I did that as a young woman. I received my bachelor's degree and then I continued to work. And I had the opportunity to form a marketing agency with two other partners. And we did some really terrific work in the Spanish language community. We were really at the forefront of taking general market companies, the Fortune 500s, and creating campaigns that were relevant to the Hispanic community. Not just translate their English language campaigns, but actually create from whole cloth something that was culturally relevant, that was aesthetically relevant, predominantly in English with a little bit of Spanish. Now you see it all, just about all the networks, a communication to communities of color that are culturally relevant and that where a community of color can relate to it. Well, we were doing that 35 years ago before it was part of the fabric of any marketing campaign. I had the opportunity to do that because I worked at a marketing agency that its clients were asking for that. And so that's how I came to create my very first business. And I found myself on the road all the time.
Wow. And how old were you then, Patricia?
I was 24. I was
Wow.
I didn't know enough to be scared. I didn't know enough to be scared or question how we were going to grow this and how we were. And so we worked really hard at it. And 28, 29, I sold my piece of the business. And for the very first time, I did not work and I went back to graduate school.
And what did you go back to get an MBA or what were you studying?
An MPA in public administration. We had a client in the agency that the US Department of Commerce, and we did some outreach campaigns in the Native American and Latino community across the country for them. And I just enjoyed the aspect of the public sector doing outreach to communities of color, communities that don't typically have access to the resources of government at the local and at the state level, but national government. And so it just sparked something within me that I wanted to learn what service in the public sector was like. And so I went to the University of New Mexico and I got my master's in public administration to work in Washington, D.C. for who had been my customer. She came looking for me. And so I went to work in D.C. and had a terrific time doing that.
And tell us about your lessons there. What do you think you learned and made you who you are from that experience? Because that seems like a pretty cool experience.
It was one of the programs that we put together it's called the Minority Serving Institutions Program. I was part of the team that helped create this from whole cloth, which if you're in a corporate setting, strategy typically dictates everything, the programming and how you're going to execute. At the time, what we were doing was really building from an entrepreneurial standpoint, a program that was designed to bring diversity into the federal sector. So what we did was create what is called, and it is still called, I'm very proud that the program exists. 25 years later, it exists, not just at the US Department of Commerce, but it is a federal-wide program that exposes students to work in the public sector, what it looks and feels like to work at the FAA, what it's like to work at the National Institutes of Health, what it's like to work at the State Department, what it's like to work at the US Department of Agriculture. And the program was designed to bring in students of underrepresented communities, like Latino communities, African American communities, and Native American communities. And so the students are brought in, they do a summer internship program. They are provided housing, a stipend,
Wow.
and mentorship in hopes that it will encourage them to look to the public sector to serve in federal, state, or in their local governments.
Wow. Well, I think about my own experience. I was part of an internship program called Inroads for minority students. And I was able to obtain my first internship. It was my first exposure to corporate America. Eventually, it led me to PwC, where I ended up working. That was life changing for me. So, that sounds like an amazing opportunity for students to learn, to be exposed to different worlds. And then the housing piece, I mean, that's incredible. The
It
housing and oh, that's amazing.
Yes, we had some real visionary leaders at the US Department of Commerce at the time, and not to say that they aren't there still, but
Yes.
it really takes vision and the willingness to step out into a space that hasn't been addressed before. I think that it is life changing for the students that participated. For so many of the students, they had never left the town in which they live. They had never been on an airplane
Mm,
before. They had never left home or lived away from their parents for any
wow.
extended amount of time. So it's life changing. It's an incredible experience. And it was very scary at the same time
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
be an 18, 19-year-old person and you've never traveled outside of the city limits in which you have been raised.
Yeah.
To suddenly find yourself in Washington, D.C., of all places, right? Not your state capital, but you're flying across the country to Washington, D.C. And so we secured lodging in a couple of apartment buildings at American University. And so the various universities in the DC area allowed us to use their dorms during the summer. They weren't being used. And so we gave them that experience as well. So, and it's a terrific program. It still exists. And so if anybody is listening to this and interested in serving the public sector or getting to know what it's like, it still exists. It's incredible.
What's it called for listeners who might be interested?
It's the MSI program, and you can Google MSI federal program or the Minority Serving Institutions program.
So what happened after serving in that capacity? Where did you go then? Is that when you joined corporate America or was that when
Actually,
you
corporate America was in between.
Oh, okay. Okay. Okay.
Corporate America was in between. So I go back, I sell my portion of the marketing agency, and I go back to graduate school and I go to work for Fortune 100. And I was there for a year. I didn't care for the leadership. And I won't name the organization because it just wouldn't serve anybody. I didn't care for the leadership. We now talk about culture and the culture that we build in organizations. It was a very toxic organization in that it didn't value gender diversity, didn't value varying points of view. It was just not the kind of leadership that I had seen, that I had worked with, and decided once I finished my 1 year anniversary that I was going to leave the organization. And it just so happens that a few months before my 1 year anniversary at this corporation, that my former client came looking for me to help
Mhm.
this MSI effort at the US Department of Commerce. And I said, absolutely, I'd love the opportunity to build something from whole cloth. Again, a very entrepreneurial, there was a lot of entrepreneurial aspects to building the MSI program because we had to sell the idea to the various bureau
Mm.
agencies. We had to communicate the value so that they would allocate budget to underwrite the interns. So a lot of entrepreneurial aspects in terms of crafting the service, the offering, selling it into the agency's
Mm.
budget, which would be the equivalent of going out and selling it to a customer. And so it was a very entrepreneurial endeavor, but I had been down that road. I had experienced that from childhood. It just was a very natural evolution when I went to work at Commerce. And probably because of what my boss at the time saw were my capabilities, right? To be able to craft a program, an offering, and address all the aspects in order to be able to sell it in and
Mm.
to execute and deliver a quality product or service.
Probably also very fulfilling and gratifying.
Absolutely. I think that at the core, that's one of the reasons I personally believe why I was tapped to be a part of this team because she had seen the work that I had done for them as a service provider. She was my
Mm.
client, who then became my employer. She had been a client before, and she saw very clearly how fulfilling the work was, how passionate I was about the work, and how passionate I was about bringing service resources to
Mm.
communities that don't have access, which as today, as a female entrepreneur, as a woman business owner, and just as an entrepreneur, period, we still are challenged to have access to decision makers, access to financial resources, to funding. So it's been a lifelong passion to
Mm.
me to help bring the resources, the talent, and the access to communities that don't have access.
Yeah, I
So
see
that's,
that passion. Yeah. When I
yeah,
just think about the impact that that program that you were a part of and the ripple effect that it must be having. If I think about my own life and that internship program that I was a part of and the impact it's had on my life, on my family's life, it's an impact that will have ripple effects for generations. And I think the same must be for the students that participated in that program. And that must be a really good feeling.
it is. It is. I had a full circle moment a year ago. Last year, I was talking to my nephew, and he was doing an internship at the Federal Aviation Administration, right? The FAA. I asked him, I said, so how did you learn about this? He said, well, at the university, somebody came to talk to us about the MSI program. And I had this full on stop moment, like, what?
Oh my goodness.
He said, yes, Auntie, I got this internship through an MSI program at the FAA. Tell me more about this program. And
Is
so
it the same
he
one?
starts to tell me all about this, and I almost started crying. Almost started crying because I thought, oh my gosh, this was the program that I helped build, that I was a part of the team that built this 20 plus years ago. My nephew wasn't even born yet. And he is now the beneficiary of this program. And so it is very rewarding that you have affected not just your generation, right? Our generation, but that you are continuing to, the legacy, the work, the hard work is yielding results, generational results.
Hmm.
And so it's
Yeah, and I hear the
talking about it.
emotion. I hear the emotion still coming through as you talk
Yeah.
about it. Well,
It's
listen,
life changing. It's efforts like these, the vision that leaders have that can impact not just, it not only makes them look good in the work that they are doing on a daily basis, but they don't realize the impact it will have not just on their end of year review, on their end of year bonus, on the funding that their department is going to get for the following year, the impact that it has on at a societal level, mind blowing. If we stop to be very deliberate, very conscious about how we execute the work that we do, I think it's one of the reasons also why we have seen the growth of ESG, the topic of environmental, social governance at a board level, at the corporate level, at the C-suite level. I think that when you stop to think about what you do on a daily basis in your companies, the effect that it can have, not just on your employee base, but on the entire community, you view everything that you do from that lens.
Mm,
It's incredible the impact that we can individually and collectively achieve.
yes. Well, I'd love to hear what came next, right? So you were part of this, you were part of this program that had a ton of impact. What made you decide to leave?
I had this long distance relationship.
Love. Love made you leave.
That four-letter word, LOVE, and this long distance relationship. And so it was, my husband also is an entrepreneur. So we're well matched from the beginning. And he wasn't going to move his business to the DC area, and he was here in Dallas. And so we decided that the easiest thing would be for me to come to the region. And so I did take a leave of absence, knowing that it was going to be incredibly difficult to transfer from a national position, a federal position to the region. Those positions just don't come about where you
Gotcha.
transfer out into the region from the federal level. And so I left public service and started to look for what I wanted to do next. And I knew I didn't want to go back into a corporate environment. And so I started to do what we do best. We started networking, and I began to see back in 2000, I began to see the cracks in the dot-com bust that was happening at the time. And so I decided that I would build a business that would support corporate environments. I didn't want to work in a large corporation, but I could certainly, one of my talents is the ability to build teams to see a need and to craft a solution for that need. And so, which is, a very entrepreneurial quality, whether you're in a corporation doing new product development or business development, or you're launching your own business, to be able to put together the right team to craft the right service offering is critically important. So I saw a need in the marketplace, and I created my company, CRC Group, and my husband and I subsequently have bought and sold a number of businesses. We've been in automotive, we've been in real estate, construction, retail, and restaurant. And we've bought and sold many of those businesses. And so we're trying to figure out a way to retire now.
And you've had success.
Yes, we've been very fortunate. We have put together some really terrific teams, very dedicated. Again, I think it's important to create the right culture. I go back to my experience, right, in corporate America, having worked in a very entrepreneurial culture. And then I had the corporate experience where the culture wasn't welcoming. And then I went into public sector where, again, the culture allowed us to create a service, a concept that was going to serve federal government well, but it was also going to serve its constituents, the taxpayer and their families well. And so I think that building culture is critically important. I had a colleague ask me the other day how I managed to keep my employee base from turning, because I have very long tenured employees. And I think it's all about the culture. They can go out and make more money somewhere else, but will they be valued? Will they be respected? Will their individual needs as individuals and the challenges in their families be considered, taken care of? So I think culture has a lot to do with it. And I still believe that people don't leave organizations, they leave the workers, their bosses, they leave their coworkers, they leave the culture and the environment. They don't leave the company, they leave the culture that they are working in. For whatever reason, it's not working for them.
I agree with that completely. I think that's been my experience where I felt the most sense of belonging is where I wanted to stay longer. And so I think that's very true. And that's what I see in client conversations as a coach. When people want to leave, they don't feel appreciated, they don't feel valued. And so it's when clients seem to start looking, right? Or they don't find the work fulfilling or challenging. So I met you through your philanthropy work and through
Yes.
the things you do in the community here in the North Texas area. Do you mind sharing a little bit about that? How did you get involved? It sounds like giving back, making a difference in the Latino minority communities has always been a part. It seems like it's a thread that's kind of been a part of your life throughout.
Yes, it has been. And I'm happy to talk about that. I think communities of color participate in philanthropy in a very different way.
Mm.
That's not the way most Anglo communities see it. We are forever helping to support our auntie who, for some, is ill, can't make the car payment or the rent payment or whatever. There's always that family resource, or a family member dies and there are limited resources for the funeral. We've always done that kind of philanthropy of taking care of our families, of our communities. We don't necessarily always do it by writing the big check to the organization that's going to actually dole out the dollars and the grants and all of that. And so I had an opportunity to participate with an organization by the name of the Hispanic 100. And it's a group of women in the DFW Metroplex who are professionals in their own right, successful Latinas. And one of the areas that they look to is number one, create community among Latinas so that we have not just resources within our own organizations, but that we know other professional women across industries in our region. And one of its charges is to support Latinas in employment, in social services, and in procurement. And so on a yearly basis, the organization Hispanic 100 put together an event and they raised funds, and those funds funded grants to community organizations, nonprofit organizations serving the Latino community. And in my involvement with them, we saw the opportunity to have a bigger impact on the Latino community. At the time, we were funding anywhere between $10,000 and $20,000 in grants annually. And we had the opportunity to take what we had in an endowment fund and move it to the Texas Women's Foundation. We had conversations there. They already had experience with two other giving circles. They were one in the African American community, the other one in the Asian community. And so we approached them and asked them to partner with us and to create a Latina giving circle. So we're able to, in the first year, seed the grants, funded the first year with 50,000, and then we raised the other half. And so the first year of the Latina Giving Circle, we were able to fund $100,000 worth of grants to nonprofit organizations serving Latina women and girls. And that has grown year over year. I think we are in the fourth or fifth year now. The Hispanic 100 has continued to raise funds to help support organizations that support Latinas. And so that's one aspect of the nonprofit work that I do. I'm also involved at the Women's Business Council Southwest, and it is an organization of business women, and they certify the ownership of a business. If you are wanting to do business with local, municipal, state, and federal government, or even in the private sector, in large corporations like those in this area, the Toyotas, the Texas Instruments, the Lockheed Martins, those kinds of organizations, then if you are a certified women-owned business, there is a little bit of an advantage, and you do have a little more access than if you weren't a certified woman-owned business. And so I participate in that organization, and we provide access to decision makers, access to capital through partnerships and education for our women business owners.
Wow. Patricia, I'm hearing your experience, you're a business owner, you're a mom, you do philanthropy. If someone's listening thinking, okay, I want to do more. I want to do a little bit more in terms of what I do for my community. Like listening to you talk so passionately about the work you've done, the work that you're a part of. There's someone listening thinking, I would like to get more involved. I'd like to give back to my community. What do you suggest is a starting place? Like, how should people get started? If someone's thinking, I'm super busy, I have kids. How do you think about it?
Well, I think that as busy moms and dads out there, there are a number of ways for you to participate. Number one, you can pull out the checkbook. Okay, that's the easiest thing to do,
Yeah.
is to support the local organization that supports whatever your passion is. It may be childhood education, it may be bilingual education, it may be English as a second language for a number of communities. We have a very international community in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. It may be women's services, it may be senior services, or it may be the Alzheimer's Association, it may be the Leukemia Society, the Red Cross. The very easiest thing for you to do is to support them financially. Are nonprofit organizations that have limited resources, and they have to do the absolute most with the resources that they can, that they have. Number two.
Well, maybe let me interrupt you real quick.
Yeah.
So if someone's listening and thinking, I want to give back, and I want my money to go as far as possible. I know there's organizations that give a grade to certain organizations. What are your thoughts on that? Is that a good way to look at it? Or what is your experience? I know I've heard that some smaller organizations wouldn't necessarily meet certain things. And so, how do you go about, quote, vetting who you give your money to?
Yes.
Because we want to give our money to what's going to have the most impact.
Well, as I said, take a look at what your passions are. The other thing, I am very passionate about supporting the Texas Women's Foundation because they do a terrific job of vetting the nonprofits that they help support. And they support many, many nonprofits in the state of Texas, right? In this region, and not just here in the Metroplex, but across the state. They vet them. Number one, are the resources being allocated to the services that you say you're delivering? Are you in good standing with the IRS?
Important.
Yes. Do you have a good leadership team, a good board? Does it represent the community that you serve? So they do a very good job of
Mm,
vetting those organizations. That would be, the Texas Women's Foundation. If you are interested in supporting an organization that perhaps is not a beneficiary of the Texas Women's Foundation, then you might look at the United Way. They do an incredibly good job as well. There are large organizations like that have already done the vetting. The other thing is that take a look at their annual reports. They are public. If it is a nonprofit organization, their annual reports are public. You can do the IRS website and take a look at their 990s. It's called the 990 form.
Good to know. I didn't know this.
Yes, yes. Every nonprofit has to file on an annual basis. It's like a tax return, how they utilize the money and how much is going to programming, how much is going to salaries, how much is going to fundraising. And so you can see, this is public information because it is a nonprofit organization. If it is a IRS 501c3 or 501c6 organization, they have to file a 990. It's full transparency. You can see how they're spending the money.
Oh, thank you for that. I think that's going to be very helpful for people as they think about, like, where do I want to donate my money? And I want to make sure that it's being used in the best way, and having organizations that are already doing the vetting for us. So Texas
Yes,
Women's Foundation is one that
absolutely.
I became familiar with a few years ago. And that was what it was attracted me to it, was they are already doing the vetting, which I thought was really
Absolutely.
cool.
Absolutely. And there was one other point I wanted to make, and it'll come back to me here in a minute.
Okay, sure. So what's the second way we could start getting involved?
The next thing is take a look at what you can integrate into your personal life. If you are already volunteering at your local school, are all the children up to grade level? Perhaps you can help to volunteer at a nonprofit that helps to support literacy for young children. We know that if children are not reading at grade level by the third grade, they are highly unlikely to catch up and to succeed
Hmm.
through high school. So literacy to the third grade level is incredibly important. Help to support your community in that way. If you don't have children and want to volunteer in a very different way, seek out an organization. You can serve on their board of directors if you are an experienced business person, if you want to volunteer as a provider of whatever service. You can offer everything from Habitat to Humanity. If you can swing a hammer, love to have you supporting that effort. Like I said, you can volunteer and you can give as much time or as little as you have available. The local food banks, we know that over the last 2 years, so many people in this community, in Dallas Fort Worth, lacked food in their pantries, in their kitchens. Volunteer at the food bank. They are always looking for people to help pack boxes. If you don't have money to give, you can give of your time and of your labor. Contact them. They have a way to sign up. And if you want to take a work group over there, you can grab all your friends and family and go down there and let them know that you're interested in bringing a group to help them pack food boxes. Your local food pantry could use. So there are a number of ways. If you want to go help serve lunch at the soup kitchen on the weekends, they can use your help. There's any number of ways that you can volunteer, from your local school the local pantry, the larger organizations. In just about every single sector, there is
Mm.
opportunity for you to participate with whatever your skill may be.
And tell us about the rewards to that. So, the personal reward that you've probably experienced from that. You mentioned your nephew and the MSI
Mhm.
program. I imagine that as you look to all the things you've done and all the things you've been a part of, that the feeling you get from that must be so rewarding. The person who gives is probably the person that receives the most in it, the gratification, the fulfillment of having served, given to someone.
I'll tell you that things, material goods, things that you can touch, the prettiest handbag, the most beautiful shoes, the most fabulous soft garment that you can have, doesn't compare to the satisfaction that one receives when you see somebody succeed, whether it is they succeeded because I can now read this page in a language that was not my native language. And you see that joy in their face, see the success of a 4-year-old child, of a 5-year-old child who can now read. And they are just incredibly excited. Look, I can read this. I can read this. That to me, you can't put a price on that. The work that I do at the Women's Business Council, we were in a board meeting yesterday, and at the end of our board meeting, our chair opens the floor to anybody to share a success, a recent success. And 5 women that are on that board talked about success in their organizations. They secured contracts, they secured collaborations. And that to me is so satisfying, is to see others succeed, because when they succeed, the entire community succeeds. And
Mm.
I always said that when you support a woman, you don't just support them individually. When you educate, you support, and you help a woman in any community be successful. They're not the only ones that are going to succeed. You have unleashed a ripple effect throughout the entire community, because that woman is going to share it with her neighbor. She's going to share that success with her sister. She's going to share that success with her coworker and their children and their children and their children.
Thank you so much for that one. That was so beautiful. Thank you for the work that you've done and that work that you are doing. I think about my experience and programs that I've been a part of in the past had such an impact on me. And then I even think about, because sometimes we think about giving to the food bank or donating to those things. And those have impact as well, obviously, and have a great impact. And I think about one Christmas when we were really young, we were struggling financially, and my parents signed up for, I think it was called Navidad en el Barrio, where it's
Oh
like
my
they
God, I love that program.
which is where like they give toys. I think my mom signed up. So they gave them a bag of toys for the 4 girls. And I remember, I mean, they weren't expensive toys. They were little dolls. We were so excited about it. And I think about that's like a memory I have of when I was young, little. I was really little. And then I think about the programs that helped me succeed, like the internship program that I was a part of, the Inroads. And so there's beauty in all of it. And I love that you highlighted, I just want to kind of like double underline that helping others
Yes.
succeed. That feeling is just wonderful. And I think about, okay, someone helped me get into the internship program. And then I brought my friends along with me and think about the impact that that's had, right? And like how
Yes.
beautiful and how good that feels.
For me, that's the rewarding part. It's like you help one person, you have no idea the impact that helping that one person is going to have on an entire community. I think about when you said Navidad en el Barrio, that triggered when I was at the marketing agency, my first grown up entrepreneur. Sure, we were doing some work for General Motors and for their GMC truck division. And they didn't know how to address the Latino market. And we convinced them, we sold them on participating, on being a sponsor for Navidad en el Barrio, to be a corporate sponsor, because I remember that the culminating event was a 1 hour broadcast on one of the Spanish language television shows. And the sponsor, GMC Trucks, they were able to do their little pitch. They got their logo on there, and they were a sponsor of Navidad Barrio. And it's so wonderful to hear you say
A
because
recipient.
yeah, I remember being a part of that. All of us have been in a shopping mall during holiday season and we see the Salvation Army Christmas trees. For us, when my son was a little boy, he's now in college, that was one of the most fun things to do is to go to
Mm.
the shopping center and pick out who we wanted to buy gifts for. And so we would pick out the angels and then we would go to the store and he would help to buy the things for the children and we would wrap them. And
Oh, that's so beautiful.
that is personally satisfying because I think that as parents, when you grow up without and then you achieve a certain level of success, it's important to remember to give, to continue to give to those who may be in the same position that you were in when you were a child, because somewhere along the line, it all comes full circle. It comes back to you. The second point I wanted to make is that you asked about how is it that I continue to do what I do. And I say this to young women that I mentor, or if I'm asked to speak, do and follow the passion, whatever that is. If you love to make clothes, go make clothes and be happy at it. Do what you absolutely love
Mm.
because the money will come. And I've been a successful business person, but I have always managed to figure out a way to inject that whole supporting women and supporting communities of color through everything that I have done. And I think that when we are intentional about doing what is right in your community, you get blessed. And the blessing and the success comes without having to work so hard at it.
Oh, thank you for sharing that because the reason I started this podcast was I was in accounting and I didn't feel like it was the right career for me and I pivoted to coaching. And now I love it. I feel like I'm living a dream. I feel purpose. I feel fulfillment. And that's what I want for people. I called it paid vocation because I want paid vocation to be paid to do what we love to do so we
Yes.
can get to do more of it. And
Yes.
so I love that you just brought that up because it sounds like purpose has been a consistent part of your work and of your life, like you just said, and that you said, and the money follows. I've met people who are maybe a little more cynical and think that's not possible. And the reason I wanted to do this was because I wanted to interview and kind of show people and show myself there's people doing this every day. There's
Yes.
people who are finding a way to make money and live with purpose. They might take some figuring out. What are your thoughts?
It's possible. It's very interesting that when I was looking at your title, it's like paid vocation. Wow, what an interesting title. I will tell you that everything I have done has led me to the next thing that I have taken on. My first entrepreneurial venture led to the work that I did in corporate America, that led to the work that I did in the public sector, that led back again to that entrepreneurial circle and allowed me at that point to really focus on impacting everything that was within my sphere of influence. And when you say paid vocation, I've been incredibly clear about supporting women in their communities, women through nonprofit organizations, women in business through certification, procurement opportunities. And 5 years ago, I refocused and doubled down on my efforts in that area, largely because I had the opportunity, and I see it as an opportunity, to really focus on my personal purpose. And I decided that, if we were going to impact the lives of women, I was going to need to focus in a different way and focus at the boardroom level. And that led me to a course at Harvard University called Women on Boards, Succeeding as a Corporate Director, which then led to building a relationship with the women in that inaugural course. And over 18 months, we stayed in touch. And then in 2018, we formalized that informal network into a nonprofit business association. And so I am co-president of that organization. It's called Women Execs on Boards. And what we do is that we support, we help educate, and we position executive women to
Mm,
serve on the court in a corporate boardroom
mm,
setting, to
mm,
serve on corporate boards. And so when you say that the word paid vocation, serving on a public and or a private corporate board comes with compensation. Here again, it's tying all things together. My passion for supporting women and women business owners, women executives. And so now we have created this organization where we have placed over 100 women. Not, we didn't do it, we facilitated the placement of over 100 women onto corporate or privately held boards.
Wow.
And some of these boards, they are the first woman on those boards. So when you say paid vocation, yeah, it can happen. And I'm on a privately held corporate board now. And because of the advocacy and because I'm so passionate about what I do, I was asked to serve on that board. I'm a non-medical person on that board. But I know from where I speak when I say if you do what you love, you will find compensation at it in way, shape, or form.
Thank you, Patricia. That was so inspiring. I'd never even considered that piece. The serving on a board is paid and it's a vocation. I'd never made that connection too. And so I think listeners are going to be really inspired by you. And how can people connect if someone were to want to connect with you? How can people learn more about you?
I am on LinkedIn, so reach out to me. Tell me why you're reaching out to me. Don't just ask to connect. Tell me a sentence or two about why I should connect with you. I am very intentional about who I choose to connect with. Please tell me why you want to connect with me. I'm on LinkedIn, so it's the platform of connection for business people. And so my name is Patricia Rodriguez-Christian, and you can find me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Patricia.
Thank you so much, Lupe.